Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Paravajakacharya, Shri Srimad, Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhāgavatam Ki, Svāmī Bhaktivedanta Ki, all glories to some of those. All glories to some of those. All glories to some of those. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamhayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam, Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha, Shri Rupam Sagrajatam, Sahagana Ragunatanvitam, Tam Sujivam, Sadvaitam Savadhunam, Parijana Sahitam, Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Shri Radha Krishna Padan, Sahagana Lalita, Shri Vishakanvitamscha, Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu, Dina Bandho Jagatpate, Gopesha Gopika Kanta, Radha Kanta Namostute, and Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi, Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari, Vrishabhanu Sute Devi, Pranamami Hari Priye, Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhu Bhya Evacha, Patitanam Pavan Ebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are on Canto 3, Chapter 23, Text 11. That's what's up there. Can't see it with my glasses. No, it should be, yeah, 3:23:11. 3:23:11. Tatreti krityam upashikshayatopadesham. Tatreti krityam upashikshayatopadesham. Ye naisame karshito dhir ramasaya. Ye naisame karshito dhir ramsayatma. Ye naishame karshito tiriramasayatma. Siddhyeta te krita maho bhavadarshitaya. Siddhyeta te krita mano bhavadarshitaya. Dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Tatreti krityam upashikshayato pasdesham. Ye naisame karshito tir ramsayai. Ye naishame karshito tiri ramsayatma. Siddhyeta te kritamano bhavadarshitaya. Dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Tatreti krityam upashikshayato padesham. Ye naishame karshito tira ramasayatma. Siddhyeta te kritamano bhavadarshitaya. Dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Tatreta krityam upashikshayato padesham. Ye naishame karshito tiri ramsayatma. Siddhyeta te kritamano bhavadarshitaya. Dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Vaishnavis. Tatreti krityam upashikshayato padesham. Ye naishame karshito tiri raramsayatma. Siddhyeta te kritamano bhavadarshitaya. Dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Tatreti krityam upashikshayato padesham. Ye naishame karshito tiri raramsayatma. Siddhyeta te kritamano bhavadarshitaya. Dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Tatra, in that, iti krityam, what is necessary to be done. Upashiksha, perform. Yata, according to. Upadesham, instruction in Scripture. Yena, by which. Eshaha, this. Me, my. Karshita, emaciated. Atiram shaya, due to intense passion not being satisfied. Atma, body. Siddhyeta, it may be rendered fit. Te, for you. Krita, excited. Manabhava, by emotion. Darshitayaha, who am struck. Dina, poor. Tat, therefore. Isha, O my dear Lord. Bhavanam, house. Sadrisham, suitable. Vichakshva, please think of. Okay, so here is the full translation in English of the Sanskrit. Devahuti continued, my dear Lord, I'm struck by excited emotion for you. Therefore, kindly make what arrangements must be made according to the Scriptures, so that my skinny body, emaciated through unsatisfied passion, may be rendered fit for you. Also, my Lord, please think of a suitable house for this purpose. So we can collectively, responsibly read. Devahuti continued, my dear Lord, I'm struck by excited emotion for you. Therefore, kindly make what arrangements must be made according to Scripture, so that my skinny body, emaciated through unsatisfied passion, may be rendered fit for you. Also, my Lord, please think of a suitable house for this purpose. So here is Prabhupada's purport. The Vedic literatures are not only full of spiritual instructions, but are also instructive in how to prosecute material existence very nicely, with the ultimate aim of spiritual perfection. Devahuti asked her husband, therefore, how to prepare herself for sex life according to Vedic instructions. Sex life is especially meant for having good children. The circumstances for creating good children are mentioned in the Kama Shastras, in the Scriptures in which suitable arrangements are prescribed for factually glorious sex life. Everything needed is mentioned in the Scriptures. What sort of house and decorations there should be, what sort of dress the wife should have, how she should be decorated with ointment, scents, and other attractive features, etc. With these requisites fulfilled, the husband will be attracted by her beauty, and a favorable mental situation will be created. The mental situation at the time of sex life may then be transferred into the womb of the wife, and good children can come out of that pregnancy. Here is a special reference to Devahuti's bodily features, because she had become skinny. She feared that her body might have no attraction for Kardam. She wanted to be instructed how to improve her bodily condition in order to attract her husband. Sexual intercourse in which the husband is attracted to the wife is sure to produce a male child, but sexual intercourse based on attraction of the wife for the husband may produce a girl. That is mentioned in Ayurveda. When the passion of the woman is greater, there is a chance of girls being born. When the passion of the man is greater, then there is possibility of a son. Devahuti wanted the passion of her husband to be increased by the arrangement mentioned in the Kama Shastras. She wanted him to instruct her in that way, and she also requested that he arrange for a suitable house, because the hermitage in which Karda Muni was living was very simple and completely in the mode of goodness, and therefore was there was less possibility of passion being aroused in his heart. So, Tatreti krityam upashiksha yatopadesham yenaisame karshitu tiriram shayatma siddhyete kritamano bhavadarshitaya dinastadisha bhavanam sadrisham vichakshva. Devahuti continued, "My dear Lord, I am struck by excited emotion for you. Therefore, kindly make what arrangements must be made according to the scriptures so that my skinny body, emaciated through unsatisfied passion, may be rendered fit for you. Also, my Lord, please think of a suitable house for this purpose." Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. This is another one of those interesting hot button verses here. So we'll, and maybe I'm just getting the luck of the draw. I seem to pull out these verses. So we'll get into it. First, I just want to clue us into where we are in Bhāgavatam, and this is chapter 23 of third canto, which is entitled Devahuti's Lamentation. And so from the 1st to the 11th, today is the 11th chapter, so this is the last of the first section of this chapter. Devahuti serves Kardam, that's her husband. She was a great princess from Swāmī Manu. He was a sage, a yogi who lived in the forest, and she chose him as her husband, and he left it up to the Supreme to find a wife, and so the Supreme arranged for Devahuti's father, Swāmī Manu, to deliver her to Kardam for marriage. And they were about as different from living arrangements as is possible. She was a princess living in royal ecstasy and royal surroundings, whereas sage Kardama lived in a hut and had practically nothing. But that was the way it worked, and she wanted him as her husband, so then she began to serve him, and due to her years of service to him, her body became thin and frail. Otherwise, she was a very beautiful princess. Okay, so from 12 to 48, which is beginning tomorrow's verse, Kardama creates an aerial mansion. And then from 49 through 57, the last of this verse, Kardama prepares to leave home. So kind of the run of the story is that, as probably most of us are aware, but maybe not so much what's going to happen in the future. The run of the story is that Kardama marries Devahuti. When he accepts Devahuti, he explains that he will marry her, he will give her children, then he will take sannyas and leave home. So that's already understood, even before they're actually married. Then they marry, and she serves her husband in the activity that her husband's engaged in. Her husband isn't a plumber or a baker or a candlestick maker. He's a sage. So he does yajnas, or various sacrifices. She helps him in that service, and they live in very, very austere surroundings. So naturally, over time, she became very skinny. However, Kardam is not an ordinary person. He is a mystic. So along with being very spiritually advanced, he also has mystic powers. He can do things that contravene the normal flow of material nature. As we'll see soon, starting with the next verse coming up tomorrow, he will, through his mystic power, create a flying mansion. So aviation did not start with the Wright brothers. It had existed long before, but it didn't happen the way we usually do it. Of course, the Vedas tell us about machines that flew, but there were also flying arrangements that happen not by machines, but by mystic power, because the material nature does work according to certain scientific principles. But if you're at another level of spiritual advancement, you can contravene those more or less normal scientific principles, which is what Karnam Muni did. He didn't have to actually sit and make blueprints and figure out how this mansion was going to look. We'll find out that it had 7 stories and it flew in the air and it looked more like flying architecture than what we would call an aircraft. But it was very opulent. And then we discover that Devahuti is making this plea to her husband that she heard that she would have children, and so she is approaching her husband, and Kardama says, "You are very wonderful. You've been an amazing wife, and your austerities will now be actually visited upon you. You will get the benefit or the benediction of them." So Karnam Muni, he arranges it that his wife will, he and his wife will move out of the little hut that they've been living in all this time and move into this flying aerial mansion and actually tour the universe, you know. And at the same time, because she's mentioning that her body has become thin and frail as a result of these austerities, she will be taken in a dip in Bindu Sarovara, and many celestial maid servants will adorn her body, and because of his mystic potency, her former beauty will be more than restored, and then she will ascend the aerial ship, and they'll travel for many years together. At the end of that period of time, then Karnam Muni will give her 9 daughters, and those 9 daughters will be given to the 9 great sages. We'll find out about that a little bit later on. They will all be wives of one of the 9 great sages. We're talking about the very beginning of the universe, so there's not a lot of people yet in the universe. We're just getting things off the ground there. So she will then ask Sage Kardama that these daughters will get married and leave home, and I'll be alone. So please do the needful. So at that point, then Kardama engages with her one more time in sex life, and then has a son. And that son will be Kapiladev. And Kapiladev is actually a direct expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, in form that will explain the Sankhya philosophy. And so then Kapiladev, not Kapiladev, but Karnam Muni will leave home, and her son Kapiladev will instruct his mother about the process of spiritual life, particularly through the system that we know of as Sankhya. So that's kind of what's ahead in this story. And we are seeing that there's a contrast here, that spiritual life is not all austerity and difficulty, although sometimes it do seem like that, you know. But although Kardam and Devahuti lived a very austere life, they will have their enjoyment traveling around. And then, you know, at a certain point, Karnam Muni will say, okay, now it's time for me to leave. And one very, very important part of this story is one of the devotees in one of the earlier classes had just mentioned this, I forgot who it was, that Devahuti will lament that she had her husband and he was a great sage, and she served him and she learned a lot from him, and she eventually had children by him, but she never actually asked him for spiritual knowledge. And so she regrets the fact that she didn't really understand the full capacity of her husband, and she didn't approach him in this way. Of course, it all ends up good in the wash, because her son will instruct her in spiritual life rather than her husband. So that's what's going to happen as this story progresses. And of course, there are a lot of interesting things here. Interesting that Prabhupada makes mention of the Kama Shastras. Evidently, just like there are Artha Shastras, there's 4 basic goals of life: Dharma, Karma, Artha, and Moksha. So Dharma is the process of religiosity, so their Shastras or Vedic literature is dedicated to that. Artha, which is material acquisition, and there are Shastras that are called Artha Shastras. But there are also Kama Shastras, which is new to me. I really had never even focused on this. Of course, everybody's heard of the Kama Sutra, at least if you're a boomer like me, then you've heard of the Kama Sutra. I don't know if younger people have come across that, but it was a big thing at one point, And this is a Vedic literature that explains all about sex. How to do it, what the positions are, all kinds of stuff. How to find the right girl, how to find the right boy, how to make the situation right. Some of the very things that Prabhupada's talking about here, all these things are in the Kama Shastras. And they're more than just the Kama Sutra. There's a bunch of these various Shastras. And they're for people who are serious about figuring out how to enjoy in the material world. Although Prabhupada does explain something about it here in the purport, really we know that material enjoyment is one of those things that it's a great idea, but nobody seems to be able to do it, at least not for very long. It's one of those great ideas, but somehow it just never flies very far. It looks good, sounds great, seems great on paper. We see the billboards for it. But somehow what you get at the end is kind of meh. It's not really very whatever. So what we learn is that happiness is certainly possible in the material world. Happiness is certainly possible. But material happiness is a lost cause. So there's a difference between spiritual happiness and material happiness. So that's where this distinction comes in. Well, last night in our Gita from Zero, we were reading 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and we hear, that Matra Sparshas Tukuntaya Shito Snasu Kadukada Agama Paino Nityastam Tiksha Shabarata. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. One must learn to tolerate them and not be disturbed. The appearance and disappearance of happiness and distress are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. So just like now, it's spring and going on into summer, everything's happy and the flowers are flowering, the birds are chirping, everything is like that. It's all, really exuberance. Long about, November, it's going to go the other way. Things will get cold, the people will retreat in, the trees will lose their leaves, the birds will stop being quite so exuberant. Some things will go into hibernation. So that's the nature of the way the material world works. According to our past karma, we already have a allotment of material happiness. And we also have an allotment of material distress. It's there, it's headed our way. It's there, and it's headed our way like an unwanted promotional package from some syndicated mercantile organization, So it's it's headed to us, and we are trying to increase our happiness and decrease our suffering, but generally we try to do it through various material strategies. We change the thermostat, we move things around, we diversify our portfolio, we do all these kind of things. We attempt to make these arrangements, not knowing that we have a certain amount of good karma and a certain amount of bad karma that's coming our way. Of course, really, if one is serious about karma, or one is actually even beyond that, a devotee, then there's no such thing anymore. We are actually creating good karma if we're serious about, as these Artha and Dharma Shastras would tell us, how to act in such a way that you increase your good karma. So you don't have to increase it by learning the right stock profile. You can increase it by performing pious work. But the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic literatures don't really recommend that. Really what they recommend is to become a devotee. If you become a devotee, then you are not thinking about how much material happiness will come to you as a result of your actions, but you're just thinking about pleasing the Supreme Lord. And so this is where we get this whole thing about the Vedas are mainly about the three modes of nature, and we hear Krishna in second chapter of Bhagavad Gita talking about the flowery words. So these Dharma, Artha, and Kama Shastras, particularly the Artha and Kama Shastras, they're about how to enjoy. But we know that in the long run, enjoyment is a great idea, but it doesn't seem to work. One wonders why I make this flat statement. Then all we have to do is point to old age. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I rest my case. This is the, if you go to an old age home or you see old people, where is enjoyment? It was one of those things that was promised, and as you get older, the body, parts of it fall off and gets more and more decrepit. And if your whole focus in life is enjoyment, then as a person gets older, that becomes more and more difficult to do in any kind of reasonable, serious way. I mean, yeah, you can enjoy a game of checkers or watch some old YouTube videos or, whatever it is, look at the Grand Canyon out the side of your RV. But the situation is there that you're getting old and you can't walk so well, you can't see so well, you don't digest so much, and so on and so forth. All these things are inevitabilities of old age. And then, as I say, as one gets older and one's medical knowledge naturally increases, we begin to see how, the body can do mysterious and interesting things all of a sudden out of nowhere. So this is the nature of material enjoyment. However, that does not mean that we can't enjoy. We can enjoy, but when our enjoyment is based on pleasing the Supreme Lord, then we don't have such a really graphically, specifically detailed, spelled out idea of what our enjoyment should look like. So this is my thesis here, that the more specific your idea of how you will enjoy is, the less likely it's going to happen. So, because that's just the way the world works, that the more details are there about the way that you feel your plan for enjoyment needs to be carried out, the less likely it's going to happen. But if your enjoyment is just that, well, you're pleasing the Supreme Lord, and, today somebody made some nice food, you heard something nice, you had a good interaction with a friend, all these kind of general enjoyments that come without our industry. We don't have to do anything to make them happen. They are a natural product of the flow of our lives. And in general, because our lives have some deep meaning, when you come on your deathbed, will it really matter how many countries you visited, or how many sex partners you had throughout your life, or what position your company ranked in the Fortune 500, or how your portfolio looked to other people when you passed on, These things really won't make much of a difference. We come to this life alone, and we leave it alone. And therefore, our name, fame, reputation, all our relationships are stripped. But the consciousness doesn't die. It simply waits to be reincarnated again, all the while wondering, will I figure it out this life? Will this life I figure it out? That I need to engage in spiritual life, in serving God. If I do, I can break this ridiculous cycle of being born again and again and again in different families, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a woman, sometimes in wealth, sometimes in poverty, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point, we have to, overcome all that. I guess before we leave, I'm going to ask for questions in a minute, because I want a chance to get some feedback going here. But I guess I should say something about this whole thing of if the man is more attracted to the woman, then a male child is born. If the woman's more attracted to the man, then a female child is born. This is all obviously coming from the various Kama Shastras, or particularly Prabhupada said this is mentioned in the Ayurveda. These things are very difficult to evaluate. And at one time in the Vedic culture, this was a big deal. Not so much of a big deal anymore. But we see that Devahuti and her husband Kardam, they're living an austere life, but they will get their material enjoyment. But this enjoyment will not compromise them. Whereas we always compare Devahuti and Kardam Muni to Diti and Kasyap Muni, who were kind of the do be and don't be. They were, the way that it shouldn't have gone, So enjoyment can be there, but enjoyment should never be the goal of one's work. Kamasya nendriya pritir. That material satisfaction or material gratification should never be the goal of one's work. Rather, one should desire only a healthy life for self-preservation. Since a human is intended for inquiring after the absolute truth, nothing else should be the goal of one's work. So, we're all material junkies. We want, we love that material gratification that comes in. So we can only give it up gradually, but there's a difference between basing your life on it and knowing that it's there, but you're trying to gradually get away from it. That's the difference between, what's happening here with Kardam, and his wife, Devahuti. They're getting their chance for their enjoyment. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But when someone becomes lost in trying to enjoy, lost in trying to increase their enjoyment, then immediately one's headed in the wrong direction. Because when enjoyment becomes the center, then you are doomed. You will get dragged over the coals of winter and summer seasons. You know, you will sometimes enjoy, sometimes suffer, because your whole focus of life is that material enjoyment. But when your actual focus is serving the Supreme, those things will seem like kind of not very important side stories. They will come and go. Sometimes you'll find it easier, sometimes you'll find it more difficult, but it won't be such a big devastation, or on the other side, this big elation that will be followed by a devastation, because that's the way material happiness and material life works. All right, so is our microphone here. Try to take some questions and comments and see if I can explain any of this any further. I was hoping to do a better job than I did, but anyway, here it is. This is what we got.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the class. One question is, I didn't fully understand your explanation about why is it that the more specific our plans for enjoyment, the less likely we are to enjoy. Why is that? That when we are making more specific plans, we're actually enjoying less. I didn't fully understand why that is.
Right. So imagine that your plan for enjoyment is that, well, tomorrow I'm going to get up and a lot of things will happen and it'll be okay. You know, that's real likely to happen. Whereas if your plan is that tomorrow I want people to recognize me as the most influential CEO, and I'm hoping that I can find a really attractive sex partner. And suppose that is, Now that's not so likely to happen, because it's the more specific you are about it, then the more things can be off in some kind of way. So we're recognizing that just as suffering comes on its own unbeckoned and uncalled for, so similarly happiness also comes unbeckoned and uncalled for. But what we want to do is somehow we just want to tip the scale more in favor of getting more happiness and getting rid of that suffering. And we try to do it, as I've been saying, through some kind of material strategy. And sounds good. If you get one to work, write me. I'd like to hear about it. It's one of those things that it seems like the right thing. As I keep saying, we come out of the womb, we grow up, and we learn that everyone around us is recognizing, I like some sensory experiences and I don't like others. And life is about increasing the ones I like and decreasing the ones I don't like. So what I need to do is be expert in how to increase the kinds of sense experience that I like and decrease the ones that I don't like. Sounds logical, makes perfect sense, doesn't work. But the other thing where, okay, I came into this life, I'm supposed to serve God, and by doing that, I may not understand it, I might not be fully down with it right at the beginning, but if I keep on doing it, I will actually discover the real purpose of life and I will feel satisfied. Doesn't make any sense to most people. It seems strange that I'm going to be happy by serving the Supreme Lord. How's that supposed to work? But it works. That's the weird thing about it. The other thing that makes perfect sense doesn't work, but this that doesn't seem to make so much sense actually does work. And of course, if a person does decide to change over and try to serve the Supreme Lord with their lives, then they realize, okay, great idea, but I'm still a junkie for the material world. So then begins the long, hard tow to gradually change our inner, likes and dislikes, which happens gradually through the process we call devotional service. Is that?
Actually, I kind of want to ask one more question too, actually, about this topic, if I have the opportunity.
Okay.
So,
unless somebody else is going to come up and drag the mic out of your hand. I don't see that happen.
so we just read earlier in the section about Swayambhuva Manu.
Right.
And Swayambhuva Manu is living and practicing Krishna consciousness. He's a very pure devotee.
Right.
And his situation is very nice. He's actually enjoying, very nicely, he's enjoying the world. But he's also practicing Krishna consciousness, and he's considered a pure devotee. But then on the other hand, we have Kardama Muni,
Right.
who's practicing Krishna consciousness, and he's a pure
got
devotee.
Zip, zero, zingo. Right?
But he is practicing very severe austerities and trying to deprive himself of all kind of sense pleasures. So how do we understand how these two paths work in spiritual life? How we decide kind of whether we would like to be on one side or the other? Is it something up to us, or is it dependent on our nature, or how do we understand that?
Well, it usually depends on what plan the Supreme Lord has for you. Yeah. And therein lies the rub, as Shakespeare would say. There's no way to know. The Supreme Lord might do anything. That's one of the things by working for this company, that you never know what the CEO's up to, and he can do anything, and he's got all the buttons at his disposal, more than anybody else. So, and that keeps it interesting in one sense. But some people, they serve Krishna in great opulence, and other people serve Krishna in great poverty. And the essence is both are equal. Generally speaking, if a person is in great wealth, there is a great tendency to misuse that wealth, because if you've got a lot of money, then it's easy to blow it out on something. If you're a pauper, then you are automatically restricted from certain kinds of sense overindulgence. So it takes actually more spiritual strength to be well-to-do and to use all your facilities and all your opulence properly in spiritual life than it does to be, destitute and just humbly serve the Supreme Lord. And so that's why oftentimes, devotees kind of wind up being sort of on the lower end of the economic spectrum rather than the higher. But there are certainly exceptions, Prabhupada actually joked about this, that there's a verse, Yasya Hamanuganami Harishe Tadanam Shanai, that Krishna says, for someone I especially favor, I take away everything from that person. And then that impoverished person, being rejected by all his family members, has no one to turn to except for the devotees. And then their lives become perfect as a result of that. It's a scary verse, and that's one of the reasons why in India people don't like Krishna. They go to Shiva instead, because devotees of Shiva, although Shiva has nothing, they tend to be magnates, very wealthy, whereas devotees of Krishna tend to be raggedy kind of people that don't have much of anything. But sometimes that's not true, so that it's the first installment of the mercy of the Supreme Lord as he takes everything away. The next installment is that then a person becomes satisfied, and then he may actually give everything back, like Prabhupada was, struggling for practically 68 years, 69 years, basically trying to support his family, trying to get something off the ground. Nothing worked. And then at age 70, he gets on a boat, comes to the United States with 40 rupees in his pocket, which is probably $2.50 or something like that, And he arrives in New York, and then, a couple of years later, he's flying around in a jet, and he's got temples all over the place, So Krishna created all these things, He wanted to create a movement, so he sent the facilities. So it can be one way and then another, and this is how Prabhupada described his own life, yasyaham anugranami harisye taddanam shanai, so you may go through the phase where everything gets taken away, you may go through the later phase where everything gets added back. Any other questions or comments? All right, so this is a very interesting chapter. We'll hear a lot more about marriage, about enjoyment, about the celestial world, about the material world, all these kinds of things. This section will eventually phase into Kapila's explanation of the Sankhya philosophy, which is how reality works and how it relates to the spiritual world. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.